We continue with conversations, but now we will be switching gears, talking about matters to do with human rights violations. And to have this discussion with us is Simon Malenya, who is the IMLU Technical Lead, Advocacy and Treaty Bodies. Karibu sana, Simon.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Yes. So before we get into the conversation, what we usually do here on the Situation Room, every week we go to a different African country. This week we have been to the Democratic Republic of Congo. So we went during the Easter holiday, then we came back now that Monday. Yeah? And there's a proverb that you collected from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and says, "You do not teach the parts of the forest to an old gorilla." You do not teach the parts of the forest to an old gorilla. Yes. How would you interpret that?
It resembles the Kenyan proverb. Mm-hmm. You don't teach a monkey. You cannot teach a monkey some new tricks, especially in the forest. Mm. And for me, that proverb has two connotations. Mm-hmm. First, the positive one, that someone who has been here, someone who knows things, someone who has experience, at least they are able to understand things, and they can be able to guide. But the second part, which is a little bit negative, is that there are situations where the people are they're a little bit they repel change. Mm-hmm. They cannot take change, and so therefore for them they stick to the old paths. Mm-hmm. They stick to the old ways, the old tactics, the old routine of doing things, and they may not need new ideas that come with time. Yeah. So they are both negative and positive connotations to that proverb.
Yeah, depending on how you want to look at it, you know. So there is learning new tricks, you know. Barabara imetengenezwa lakini wewe unataka tu kukimbia kwa kando kwa misitu. Tumia barabara.
Sure.
You know, so thank you, and let's get straight into it, right? So established 1993, IMLU on matters governance and human rights, and non-governmental organization that has been registered in the country. So 1993, we look at the country dealing with matters to do with human rights, and one asks the question: there is police, there is the judiciary, then there is IMLU. What exactly does IMLU do?
Thank you very much. First of all, IMLU is a non-governmental organization that used to be called then. Mm-hmm. Today we say it's a not-for-profit organization, not-for-profit public benefits organization that's registered as such in the country. It's a human rights organization that deals with both medical and legal actions to support human rights survivors of violations within the country. We exist to document cases using forensic methods of documentation to support cases, so that those cases just don't become another statistics, another status, but they can be able to stand the test of time, to support those survivors at least to get justice within our corridors of justice. But at the same time also supporting institutions, government institutions, supporting those institutions to ensure that they're accountable, they follow the rule of law, and most importantly, at least they follow the constitutional tenets that guarantees the state to be able to protect its Kenyans, to protect its citizens, and for people to live in harmony and peace within the country.
How do you do that? How do you ensure that agencies that are supposed to follow the rule of law don't flout the rule of law? And even when they do that, then what kind of conversations would one imagine? Like, so there is extrajudicial killings. IMLU would get in there to ensure that justice is served, that maybe compensation is paid. How do you have those conversations with those who are supposed to uphold the rule of law?
Thank you. And first of all, for us, we work in a very collaborative manner with the state agencies. Most of the time, people outside there say that not-for-profit organizations like ourselves are outside there fighting government or fighting government agencies. But that is not the case. The case for us is to complement what government does, to support government, and to collaborate with government to ensure that services, the common services the government is supposed to render, reach the common mwananchi. And for us to do that, there are two ways. First of all, is to support the state in terms of their gaps that they may have. And these gaps may be in terms of the legal gaps as well, where we do have advocacy sessions with them. And we say that we have these policy gaps that needs to be bridged. For instance, we have the 2010 Constitution that's extremely robust. But we have, again, some legal provisions or policies that were enacted before then that do not conform to the Constitution as of now. So for us is to support the state to come up with ideas of amending those laws to conform to the Constitution. The simple part that I will pick for now is, for example, the Public Order Act of 1950. Many people do not know that the Public Order Act was actually enacted in 1950, before we gained independence. And it was mainly enacted to handle the Mau Mau. So you can imagine that at the moment we still have an act of parliament in force that was enacted to handle Mau Mau by the Muzungu that is being in operation right now. That act does not even allow the right to protest, the freedom of assembly. And yet the Constitution under Article 37, for instance, allows that as a right. So we need to have a conversation with the state agencies on how to amend some of these laws to conform to the current Constitution.
For that specific one, what exactly has been done? Because we have this duality of the past, which is living in the present, and the present that we are writing for ourselves with the 2010 Constitution is a totally different narrative. Are they clashing? What's the conversation in that specific issue?
In relation to this, the conversation is twofold. First of all, it's a legal conversation, and the second one is a political one. Of course, in the past, even before the 2010 Constitution, we have had situations where the state weaponizes the police and uses the police to manage politics. And that has been the problem. And perhaps that is the fear we have even the current governments, not just in Kenya, but across Africa, and especially in this region, East African region, that I can speak to. So the conversation has been that how do we heal or how do we harmonize both the legal and the political clashes that always happen? So those undertones are the ones that we are dealing with. And we are saying, for instance, the Article 37 allows people the right to protest, to picket, to present petitions before any authority. And it says, it goes further to say that that right is not subject to any curtailing by the state. But of course, we know that in terms of order management, there are rules and guidelines. The Public Order Act, of course, says that you need to inform the police when you are protesting, and the police somehow need to give you permission. Okay? And you need to seek that permission. You need to get that permission for you to be able to proceed. But the Constitution does not say that. The Constitution simply says that you need to inform.
Inform the police,
And once you inform, then they have got their mandate is to be able to protect you and to protect the property of the people as you exercise your constitutional right to protest. That does not exist even up to today. You hear even right now, it's a political period, and people will say that due to state security, we will not be able to allow such and such rallies, we will not be able to allow such and kind of protests. And that has been the conversation, that we need to change this so that we don't use state machinery to be able to curtail the rights of the specific citizens when they need to exercise them. So as an organization, we support the state agencies to sieve out some of these areas that we find that they have a clash with the Constitution and the international human rights standards. So as IMLU, we have been on the forefront to support this process of amendments, support the processes of review, support the processes of changing the mindset. And perhaps that has been the biggest part, that a police officer does not go to the street to beat someone because they did not know the law. It's a mindset that has been set from time immemorial. What is your status of training? What is your status of orders that you get from the commanders? What do they tell you? That we need to manage situations. So that mindset is also very important that we support them. And so for IMLU, we also support the issues of attitude change within the service. What needs to be done? And then the second one is the relationship between the securities apparatus and the citizen. Of course, we know in the streets when you see young people sitting somewhere and they see a police officer, what normally happens? Meeting mkutano imeisha.
Scatter.
They scatter. But what's the reason for that? Because this is a police officer who is supposed to be protecting you. So you are right to be protected by the security apparatus comes first. But when you see that person, you see more danger
than safety.
And that has been the issue. And the issue is that the security apparatus, when they see you walking around the streets, perhaps dressed in a certain way, perhaps wearing a certain manner in a certain corner, they presume that there is something illegal going. There is a crime that is either happening or about to happen.
You're profiled.
You are profiled.
Now, I am struggling because you spoke about the repelling, people are repellent to change, as we were trying to interpret the proverb. And I hold it that the need for compensation that you're talking about, the need for existence of IMLU and other structured agencies and bodies is because we, the Kenyan people, have repelled the change that we created, which is the Constitution of Kenya. You've cited the Public Order Act of the 1950s. That and many others were meant to collapse the moment we promulgated our Constitution.
2010,
Actually, it is there in the transition and acquisition. Everything was to collapse and we assumed the new laws. But we seem to be resisting that. And hence now all these forms of conflict, whether it is legal aid or medical aid or other social interventions that we have had to do, they arise because there is that conflict between we, the people, and the laws we have, and the implementers in their various capacities. There is a clash. So it seems the bigger problem is not just isolating the police, the extrajudicial killings and all those versions of the rule of law, but it's the fact that we have failed to honor the very Constitution that we swear to, especially for the people who are employed to serve the public. Would that be a correct assumption?
Yeah, it is, and thanks for that. And when I was walking in, I was listening to the news, the news at 9 a.m. news, and one of the members of parliament, I think it was Honorable Millie Odhiambo, was stating that if we do not have the goodwill, we can create laws, we can amend laws, we can repeal laws, but everything will remain the same. And she's absolutely right.
Yes.
The problem we have is that we create laws that exist to manage or to support the political class, not the local mwananchi. And that's where you see that when this law is good, then you'll support it. A politician will support it. At that particular very time. When it's bad, they will not support it. At one point in this, there is a former Vice President Mudi Awori, who said at one point that when you're making these laws, that make them, that when you sit on the other side, you'll still be comfortable with them.
With it,
You will still be comfortable with it. And we have seen even former cabinet secretaries, very serious state agencies who are former in the other regimes, now falling prey to the very laws that they created at the moment. And when they do that, they run to the mwananchi to say that we are being persecuted. The laws should be made for a very, very common mwananchi down there. So in a nutshell, our politics tend to decide which law is good and which law is bad. Of course, for today, if you're saying that we need, for example, flexible tax regimes. In the former regime, they will say that's okay. In the current regime, they will say at that time it was that time, but we need to support ourselves to get taxes. For today, it's good. For tomorrow, yesterday it was bad. And the same thing again will repeat when the next, for example, administration comes in. They will say, we were not there at that particular time, but for now, this is exactly what we need. So we need to have laws that are extremely objective and supportive to any common mwananchi, any mwananchi, at any given time. So that the law that applies to a member of parliament is the same law that applies to me, the same law that applies to you, is the same law that applies to someone who is running a business down the streets here. And that has been the problem that we have had in this country, that people create laws and then apply them selectively depending on where they sit at that particular time.
Yeah, Simon, and you see, the Constitution 2010, after its promulgation, everything else that existed before it ceases to make sense, ceases to exist, because we are now operating under the new Constitution with a different set of how we're doing business. The Constitution says anything else that contradicts this Constitution is null and void, right? That's what it is. So there is no way then in 2026 we would see that we're operating with a Public Order Act of 1953. That would be individuals who have refused to accept change, individuals who have refused to implement the Constitution. And that then brings me to political goodwill when it comes to the implementation of Constitution and ensuring that these rights that Kenyans have granted themselves through the Constitution are actually enjoyed. Because you've said that you collaborate with the government, right? And with collaboration with the government, there are instances where collaborating with government would be very difficult because things that you are calling out are things that you're seeing the government doing. In such instances where even in your collaboration you find it difficult, what discussions do you have? Do you call them out privately? How do you go about it? If you've said, as opposed to what many know is NGOs usually fight with the government and everything, you collaborate with the government to change situations. In this instance that you're talking about, a law in existence that is in contravention with the Constitution, how do you go about it?
Thank you. First of all, the collaboration with the government takes so many aspects.
So many aspects, yeah.
Even calling them out in a press is some sort of collaboration, in my own view. Because you're telling someone that, look, you have not been able to do this. Can you be able to handle this and move it forward? It's a sort of collaboration because you're giving me the information that perhaps either I didn't have or I had, but I had slept on it. And that's good. But the main one is in terms of developing some of these policies that say that this is the area where we are. For example, the Ministry of Interior in 2024 August gazetted a national task force that is a steering force that is supposed to oversee the review of these acts, including that Public Order Act. That steering force was gazetted in August 2024 with a 9 months
deadline.
Yes. Within those 9 months, they did zero. It ended. Then that 9 months again, they were added another 9 months, which comes to an end in end of June. We are barely 2 months away. As we speak today, very little has happened. We have had a lot of collaborations and meetings, and of course saying that we need to draft some of these things. From August up to date, we haven't been able to see some of these things. So when we sit with them in the meetings, of course, and government calls some of us in these meetings, and when we sit with them, we realize that they have got their own timelines. But unfortunately, those timelines are not met. And then they will come up, of course, and say that we didn't meet these timelines, but we have another timeline, as we're saying. We will have these drafts by this particular time. Again, that timeline is not met. So, of course, as outsiders or civil society, we can do very little other than just persuading. It is the body's right at their court, and it's their baby they're supposed to know.
Would you say that based off that explanation that there is political goodwill in ensuring that these things are achieved? Because for government to operate, there has to be political goodwill. Like if you say we're going to achieve this in 9 months, then let 9 months be 9 months. Fact that nothing happened within the first 9 months, then you're giving ourselves a second tenure, another 9 months. And as we speak right now, June is just around the corner, and little has been done. Would you say there is political goodwill in achieving what the Constitution of Kenya 2010 wants?
And it's down to that, because and when you say that, they say that we fight government. But of course, as I said, governments use some of these laws to manage politics. We are going into the year 2027 general elections, and of course, from what we are seeing right now, there's a lot of polarization. There are a lot of incidences of violence, which we are calling out and saying that we do not need this. You remember in 2004, Honorable Ruku, the then member of parliament for Mbeere North, the current cabinet secretary for
public service,
introduced a bill in parliament called Assemblies and Demonstrations Bill. And that bill was even more barbaric than the Public Order Act. And it had even said that for you to be able to demonstrate or to protest, these are the guidelines. And those guidelines were extremely unconstitutional. They contravene the guidelines that the Constitution gave. When he was appointed to the cabinet, that bill failed, of course. Honorable, the current women rep for Nairobi,
Esther
Passaris, developed another idea of that was something like complementing the Ruku bill. And in fact, at that particular time, she was saying that for you to protest, we will designate
areas of protesting,
that the government is the one to designate. They can actually tell you, if you want to protest today, you go to Karura Forest.
Or Machakos.
Or you go to Garissa. So somewhere where you're supposed to protest. You're not supposed to pass here, you're not supposed to go here. Then they even said that when you're protesting, it should be some meters, I think 100 meters from certain installations. Again, more barbaric than even the Ruku one. And we say that those attempts point to the political goodwill. That we need politicians at that particular time who are not playing ball to safeguard themselves, but those politicians who are playing ball to protect Kenyans. Is this a right for Kenyans? Yes. Are you able to pass it? Because today, Honorable Passaris will be a member of parliament. Next year, she might not be. Then what happens when she's a common mwananchi like me and you? How will she be able to present her petition when she's aggrieved?
She'll have to go to Machakos.
She'll have to go to Machakos. Will she agree to that? So we need to have a situation where everyone plays ball. That we are making a law today that will serve you tomorrow. And you will not feel infringed by that particular law when you're told protest in Machakos.
I mean, it's quite... And this, I want us to go a little bit back in history, even the formation of IMLU back in the 90s, at the height of the clamor for multi-partyism. We have the photos. History tells itself. It was not, the best time to be around, especially if you're somebody who was pushing for democracy full. So we saw a lot of police brutality, and now we are talking a lot of years after, over 30 years after. And we're still talking about the same thing. So when it comes to policy, not much has changed. We are still holding. It's taking so long to change. In terms of the way victims are handled, in terms of compensation, juxtapose for us in the 90s and now in 2026. Have we made any progress as a country, or we've just changed clothes, but the same monkeys in the same forest?
Thank you. To be honest, we have made tremendous progress. We cannot give a blind eye to it. We have made tremendous progress in terms of policies, in terms of laws, but also in terms of attitudes as well. There are things that have changed. Again, there are things that we have no control of in terms of technology that have changed from the 90s up to date. And there are ways of course, documenting some of these cases that were happening in the 90s that is different from what's happening in 2026. Due to technology, due to the change of laws, and due to change of attitudes and culture as well. So there have been tremendous progress up to date. But what we are saying is that we can do better. That progress that we have made, we cannot wish it away. But what can we do better moving forward.
Okay.
That, for example, that in the 90s you could be detained without trial.
Yeah.
Okay, and you could be detained for as long as the government wished before you are produced before court. The strides we have made is that cannot happen to date. We have specific rights that you're supposed to be presented to court, for instance, before 24 hours. There are specific provisions for people who have been disappeared or abducted that you can move to court for orders of habeas corpus and ensure that person is produced before court. So those strides did not exist in the 1990s. We have them today. The other thing is in terms of documenting in situations of violence. We didn't have much in terms of forensic documentation, gaining evidence to support victims that could stand the test of time within the corridors of justice. Then, we do have it now. And it supports a lot of victims in terms of healing and moving forward and seeking accountability and justice. So we have made those strides up to date, and we seek to reinforce them and make them better, because we do not want to lose it at this particular moment.
Okay.
So we need to keep it, and we have seen those.
Today in the dailies we have a judgment on Rex Masai. Everybody knows the late Rex Masai case.
Yes.
And it says he was shot when he was walking away, or rather when he was fleeing.
He was shot from the back.
From the back. Tantamount to violation of his own right to picket. So he was not being confrontational, he was not being a threat. And many other people have died. June 24th is coming. There will be a commemoration, of the fallen legends and heroes. The police will still be around because, one, they need to safeguard the protesters, Actually, they should make sure that you're protesting safely. But unfortunately, we are served to the opposite.
Yes.
Then I want to borrow from what we keep saying, a benchmarking from the more developed democracies. You will see demonstrations there happen in different form and structure. There is heavy police presence, but there are rarely any casualties or even injuries. If you look into the European countries, mostly. But here, we are treated to a situation whereby, as you have alluded to, the decisions that determine the outcome of the discourse, largely the political discourse, because a lot of these things happen in the realm of the political discourse, are determined by personalities and individuals who actually do not have such powers, because the powers from our constitution are given to our institutions, not individuals. So, when will we shift from where you stand? Because as Kip said, it's 30 years down the line since we've been talking about the change that we know we need, and we have even enshrined it in our constitution. But we still keep walking away from the institutions that are meant to do the work. Because if you keep looking for a good person, one may come this season, but the next time they may not be there. If you want a good IG of police, one may be there today, but then the appointing authority may not be the right person. So it cannot be about individuals and personalities. It has to be about the rule of law and the institutions. In your line of trying to create that space of rule of law, basically, how do you find that challenge of having strong institutions develop in Kenya and maybe in extension in Africa?
Thank you for that. And you see, not just Africa, perhaps we can speak about the region, because the East African region affects us directly.
Right.
And we have enough institutions, I can tell you. Even the independent ones, we have enough institutions in this country. And perhaps Kenya is one of the countries that is over-legislated. We have so many laws. We don't operate in a vacuum, that we lack certain laws. We have a law on almost everything. Perhaps on the compensation is different, but we have a law on almost everything. What we need is the goodwill to implement those laws. One of the things that we have in this country are semi-functional, non-functional institutions, especially independent institutions. The independent institutions that are supposed to ensure that Kenyans are safe, They hold the government accountable. And of course, they point out to the government on what needs to be done. We have independent institutions like the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, independent institutions like IPOA, the Office of DPP. Those are independent institutions that are supposed to carry out their mandate independently. And when they do so, you will have a country that is running within the rule of law and smoothly. The unfortunate part is that these institutions work at the behest of the executive. That's the unfortunate part. And there are two reasons to it. One is that these institutions, the personnel within these institutions are somehow, let me not use a negative term, but they are appointed by the executive. Wholesomely. You go to Kenya National Commission and tell me which commissioner is not appointed by the president or by the presidency. They will talk about the Public Service Commission, but the Public Service Commission is under who?
Yes.
Okay. Go to IPOA and you'll find right from the chair to the other board members, they are all appointed by the presidency. There's no criteria. You will never be told how the president arrived at so and so to be the commissioner of this institution or the other one. You go to the Office of Director of Public Prosecutions. How is the ODPP, the director himself or herself, how are they appointed? Okay, is the process open? Is it transparent? How do you come up with the Director of Public Prosecutions? Nobody remembers. Nobody remembers how, for example, the current DPP
got into office.
Council Ransom was appointed. But he was appointed anyway.
Yes.
So that speaks to the independence. The second angle to independence is about financial support. Most of these institutions rely on the treasury for support. Yes, they normally present their budgetary estimates to government and say, in the coming year, we expect to spend this. Help us to reach that level so that we can be able to operate independently. But what happens? These guys are given half of the budget. Most of these institutions are given half of the budget. But even that half is not fully given. So you're given half, the 50%, but what will come to your account is 32% or 40%. I will speak out one, IPOA, for example. For IPOA to work independently and ensure that they cover the entire country, for example, in their strategic plan 2025-2030, they're expected to have 1,000 investigators in the country. You know how many they have currently? 77,000.
77,000.
77.
Yes.
Out of 1,000. What percentage is that?
It's less than.
It is less than 10%.
10%, yeah.
Okay. Less than 10%. So if you're operating, you have, for example, Western Region, an office in Kisumu where they have 2 investigators operating in over 8 counties. How will that work? With one vehicle. So if someone has gone to Kisii from Kisumu and there is a case in Kakamega, then it has to eat. You understand the dynamics? So you cannot operate independently. You cannot function well. So what is needed is that there must be adequate and sufficient budgeting and budgetary allocation to these independent institutions.
You know, Simon, you just bring in something that is very critical because after the Gen Z demonstrations, then broad-based government came into place, right? So one of the key areas that was there was compensation of victims. And that was one of the key items in the 10-point agenda. But we talk about the Human Rights Commission the other day just said they do not have funds to go around the country to take to investigate on individuals who need to be compensated. I know that the president did set up that panel of experts, who are to spearhead the compensation matrix. But as we speak today, budgeting is a problem. Kenya National Human Commission that should be spearheading these as well. One would ask the question, if we have this body that is mandated to deal with these, why then do we see a separate body which one would say is politically inclinated to do the very same job that an independent institution ought to be doing. Do we see, we've talked about political goodwill in terms of this compensation, but even as we talk about compensation, are we really serious when we talk about compensation, or is it just another political rhetoric that does exist there just so Kenyans can cool down so that the political class can do what it is they want?
Perhaps one of the things that the Office of the Attorney General needs to tell people that even before the Gen Z revolt in 2024, there were attempts to amend the Victims Protection Act as well as the Public Finance Management Act in 2024, from March actually 2024, and this is a process that started in 2023, even before we talked about the Gen Z revolt. And that attempt was to create what they were calling the Victims Protection Fund. That fund was supposed to support victims of human rights violations. That review process in 2024 with the Office of the Attorney General, the State Department for Justice, we went in collaboration with us and other non-state agencies. We went throughout the country collecting public views on this. Okay? And that process, once we did that, they actually went ahead and developed some kind of draft amendment bill, which has not seen the light of day.
Yeah.
As we speak.
Because it's not important
today. Yes. So even the idea of compensation, which is a very noble one, before that idea came up, it's a very noble idea. But even before that idea came up, we already had a mechanism, a process that was ongoing that only needed to be completed. You did not need to form another framework. There was already an existing way to develop this framework and fund it. In fact, the proposed bill had said that we will establish this fund and it will be funded annually, starting with 3 billion Kenya shillings. The current compensation says 2 billion.
Yeah.
That is what it says. But that was supposed to be then. Then when this framework came up in August last year, and we said it's a noble idea, but the process is not correct.
But Simon, can we have compensation for victims who are felled by police, victims who extrajudicial killings happened without justice? Because that's the biggest question. Can we have compensation without justice, or should they go hand in hand?
It should. And as we know today, compensation is an ad hoc thing. It is not a permanent thing. It's an ad hoc thing. Especially this one that the Office of the President came up with in August last year. The development of that framework that will oversee this compensation was supposed to be an ad hoc one. Remember, compensation is just one form of support to the victims. One form, what we normally call reparations. It's just one form. And perhaps it is the least. Of course, right now, because of tight economic situations, people see money and say, this is the only thing I need right now, money. But when you speak to these victims, when you speak to survivors and their families, you will realize that this compensation should come at the tail end. It should be the last thing on the table. There are other mechanisms that or other support that these victims and survivors and their families require as a matter of urgency. I will pick up one. Medical rehabilitation. There are people, for instance, who are shot on their legs and they're still, or in their bodies, and they still live with those bullets. They cannot access medical care. So if you give that person a money, because even this framework has not established how much, if you give that person, for instance, 100,000 shillings, how does that person survive with 100,000 shillings? Which hospital will you walk into and be supported medically to remove that bullet that is in your body with 100,000 shillings? And yet perhaps you have been incapacitated in terms of livelihoods and you need to still support other areas of livelihoods. So compensation, as good as it is, it should be the last card on the table.
Allow me to ask, when you talk of compensation, it's something that should happen after evaluation. So you're able to value that this is what we have settled at. But as you rightly put it, a lot of disruption happens, especially to the victims, people who are surviving the police brutality. Some live with disabilities. Others are traumatized. They need psychosocial care.
Support,
They need the rehabilitation you're talking about in different forms. So there's a lot of disruption that happens that money alone cannot
cure.
That is one. Two, I ask myself, is compensation an admission of guilt by the government? And if so, then what measures do we see? Because it should be, it should swing both sides. If we're going to compensate you, a crime was committed. There has been forensic evidence in many instances, those who have died, Rex Masai, rest in power, and many other people. It has been established a certain way. The surviving victims also has been established a certain way. So you realize crimes are being committed, but we only hear the end of that. We're going to do some, reparation, some compensation. But the admission of guilt from the side of government, which should, in my opinion, trigger institutional strengthening and changes, is not well spoken of. It does not happen. How do we reconcile the two?
And perhaps that's why, for some of us, opposite from the instance, and I said that you cannot support victims through a political process.
Right.
You need to support victims through a legal process that will stand the test of time. And that's why we say that you cannot create a panel that is ad hoc to support victims, and then what happens? Because in Kenya, as we speak today, there are victims of crime who are not necessarily victims of protests. So what happens to them? Okay?
Yeah.
For example, the Boniface Odhiambo case in Lake Nakuru.
Yes.
He's not part of this compensation framework that is currently in operation. But what happens to his family? What happens to such
Albert
a case?
Ojwang is not as a result
not
of
a
protest.
victim of protest. What happens to that case? Okay? So there are so many other cases that are left behind. And that's why we said, if the government needed this thing to work, why don't you pause and move with the institutions that are supposed to lead this process? The Kenya National Commission on Human Rights and the Victims Protection Board that are mandated with this. Why don't you use these institutions and then develop a long-lasting framework that will be able to support? But coming back to this framework, the current one of compensation, first, as you rightly put it, it's an admission of guilt.
Yes.
But once you have done that as government, then it means that there are other 4 elements of reparations that you need, again, beyond reparation, that you need to support. Number 1, that you need to offer holistic rehabilitation to this person. That I have admitted I wronged you. Yes, I will give you 100,000 to wipe your tears. But then I have not healed the wounds that you have, that perhaps you still have physically in your body. So that rehabilitation, for medical rehabilitation, is very important. The second one you alluded to is the psychosocial rehabilitation, which is also, again, very important. How does that person heal? How do you help that person to bring back their mental status, their mental well-being into a good place? So you need to support that person in terms of healing psychologically. The second angle that I will speak to is in terms of accountability.
Accountability, yes.
Accountability. And accountability here is both at the individual level and it's both at the holistic or the collective level. That fine. The state has admitted, for example, the case you have mentioned of Rex Masai. Then now what? Who is held accountable? That person say that the Rex Masai's family will receive 1 million and then that is it. The person who shot Rex Masai, who is a state officer, is still walking outside here. The government has not done much to support the family. What level of accountability do we require? And the accountability here, when I say individually, is for that particular security officer who fired the gun. That person must be held criminally liable. Okay. But beyond that, we also need the command responsibility for the command to be held accountable. That these people walked outside there with orders, but from who? So that these people who gave orders, illegal orders for for the protesters to be shot at, for the protesters to be harmed, to be injured, needs to take responsibility as well. And before we see the command responsibility taking accountability, then some of these cases will not end. Because as an OCS, you need to know that if I say go and shoot people, then I need to take that responsibility as an OCS. For that thing to end. But as you rightly put it again, as I finish, is the admission of guilt. The state needs to come out clearly and say that we admit we were wrong, but this will not happen again. You have to give like a national guarantee to the people that this is not going to happen again. Nobody will be shot again during protests. Nobody will be killed again. Nobody will be disappeared. Nobody will be injured by the state. The state must give that guarantee.
I mean, and that's a good thing. For me, apologies for being a bit pessimistic, because we have so much gaps, all right, in terms of framework implementation. Vile wanasemanga kwa ground vitu ni different. And it seems it's been different for a very long time. So in terms of the being realistic, because you are meeting these victims, you are intervening, you're paying for autopsies for people. There's no light work that you guys are doing on the ground. We have an election coming already. The rhetoric here is not the best.
67 weeks.
Look at that. Ososi now is in hospital. You see, bandaged up. Is a victim. Of course, not of police brutality, but again, question is low-hanging fruits in terms of deliverables. If we to say that we need to action something right now that will work for us, what is that? Because already we collected views of Kenyans that didn't go anywhere. What are we working with? What are the low-hanging fruits that we can tap into right now and say this is the action point that can at least help us move forward before we ask for the bigger things?
First of all, I want to again say pole to that Mheshimiwa you have just mentioned. In the last regime of President Uhuru Kenyatta, the current CS, Honorable Murkomen, perhaps on similar situations, is the current CS for Interior. Okay? Ososi today happens not to be a common mwananchi, but he's a victim. In the next regime, maybe that Ososi might be the CS for Interior. What will he do differently? That's what I always ask. What will he do differently? Okay? Because we have a situation where a member of parliament being assaulted in public, in broad daylight, okay? It's not a kawaida thing. It's not a kawaida thing. What happens to a supporter of Ososi in Kisumu at that particular moment, who is a common mwananchi, because I understand Ososi has security, he walks around with security. I don't know where they were when he was being assaulted. But what happens to that common mwananchi, like myself, who is walking in the streets of Kisumu, and I'm facing that situation? And we are saying that these situations are not isolated. Some of these things are organized and planned. But who does the organizing and the planning? And that's why sometimes we say, for accountability, we need to investigate further and say that there is someone who gave orders. There's someone who said, there's a member of parliament seated somewhere. There is this group. Please go and carry out A, B, C, D.
Or someone who turned a blind eye. As you say, as they are saying in Kisumu, that place has so many other security officers guarding other vital institutions. What happens? Nobody was arrested at that particular time. Nobody. Then what is happening to the Kenya? As we move to the general election, the thing that we need to say and we need to put outside there is the harmony between the locals or between the mwananchi and the security apparatus. I will not rush to judge the young men who assaulted the MP. Because for me, that was not their judgment. Yes, they committed acts of crime. And that is period. They must be answerable to that. But beyond them committing the acts of crime,
There are people who by omission contributed to those acts of crime.
Yes.
By omission. And those people need to be held accountable. So as we move forward to the general election, we will see many of these scenarios. But is that the Kenya we want?
You want. And I think that takes us to, because we're running short of time, but say in the next 1 year, right, today, if we sit here today and next year, what changes to the law would we say we must see for us to say that we are moving in the right direction and winning this fight against torture, police brutality, and misdemeanor pretty much that we see in the country?
If I'm seated here next year, and what I will need to see is, number one, is accountability. That do we have a situation where we have the command accountability, responsibility for the mistakes of the subordinates that happen? We always run away. But there are subordinates, of course, who carry out orders of the senior officers, senior politicians, senior government officials. What level of accountability do they hold? I want to see a police officer if a police officer from Central Police Station harms or injures a Kenyan, the OCS must come up and tell us why that happened. Not that officer.
Yeah.
Okay? As you'll see, those young men who attacked the Honorable Osoti, they will be paraded in court. They will be arraigned in court. But nobody will talk about the financials of that kind of violence. Them, yeah. Okay? And we need to hold those people accountable. Number two, we need a system where victims are rightly compensated and supported to heal. Once that happens, that we have a framework in place where victims of human rights violations can be able to support it, then we will have won this.
We will have won this.
Starting from there, we will have done tremendous work in able to reduce these cases of violence.
Simon Malenya is the IMLU Technical Lead Advocacy and Treaty Bodies, and it's a discussion around human rights violations, survivors and victims assistance. A good place to be at, conversations at the right time. And to the duty bearers out there, you must smell the coffee and do what is right. To the Mananchi, we thank you for joining us for this conversation. The conversations continue, and we want to thank everybody who's joined us this entire week. Today is Friday. To the gentleman in Noakip Kimboya Asante Sana, we should touch base with you at 1:30 p.m. there for news.
Yes.
Right, and also Captains of Industry, amazing work you're doing. As well as Joe Kamanya, Silver Folk in the room. Asante Sana for being here.
Thank you.
Na tunasema asante sana to everybody who's made this a success. Asante sana.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.